I want to thank Professor Günay for his
information on the institution of higher education in Turkey. Please let me welcome Professor Dr. Üstün Ergüder from Sabancı University to make his presentation on the management and financing of higher education.
First of all, I'd like to thank Professor Dr. for inviting me to this conference, to Fatih University. And as usual, it's always a pleasure to come to this campus, such a nice campus at the outskirts of Istanbul. Now, what I'll try to do today is I'll try to build in some anecdotes to what I will say. So, let me give you a brief synopsis of my experience. I was the rector of our university in Turkey between 1992 to 2000, just when, as Durmuş Bey said, Turkish higher education went from elitism towards massification. And I'm also currently the president of the Magna Carta Observatory, which is in Bologna, Italy. And at Sabancı University, I'm an emeritus professor dealing with education reform, but not higher education. Education reform in Turkey. That is, education from the preschool education to the gates of the university. I think that's a major problem in Turkey that we have to concentrate on. So what I will say will be based on these experiences, especially my experience at Boğaziçi University when we went through, and I think still the university is now going through an important funding crisis. And I will also, listening to Durmuş Bey, I became aware that higher education, I'm aware that, I mean, he also told us that higher education is a lot more than universities. But I think universities play a very special role within higher education. And I think their role in the society is being gradually being confused with the general role that is assigned to higher education. Universities are the thinking nerves of a society. They have to think, they have to produce new ideas, they have to be the devil's advocate of the society. So my really focus is on universities because I see that some of the trends that he discussed may be a very important threat to what a university is. So I will, in my comments, will be focusing on universities rather than higher education itself. Now, let me give you some quotes on what a university is. Michael Oakeshott, in his idea of a university, emphasizes the communication aspects of learning. He says, what distinguishes a university is a special manner of engaging in the pursuit of learning. It is a corporate body of scholars, each devoted to a particular branch of learning. What is characteristic is the pursuit of learning and cooperative exercise. A university, moreover, is a home of learning, a place where tradition of learning is preserved and extended, and where the necessary apparatus for the pursuit of learning has been gathered together. Peter Scott, in a volume edited by him, estimates that of the 1,854 universities founded between 1200 and 1985, 3/4 were established since 1900, and 1,101 were founded between 1950 and 1985. Thus, the modern university, especially the modern higher education system, is a creation of the nation state and of the contemporary times. Clark Kerr, in his book on the uses of the university, makes a very interesting observation. He states, about 85 institutions in the Western world established by 1520 still exist in recognizable forms, with similar functions and with unbroken histories, including the Catholic Church, the parliaments of the Isle of Man, of Iceland and of Great Britain, several Swiss cantons, and 70 universities. Kings that rule, feudal lords with vassals, and guilds with monopolies are all gone. These 70 universities, however, are still in the same locations, with some of the same buildings, with professors and students doing much the same things, and with governments carried on in much the same way. This is a very interesting observation. It really points out to the nature of the different nature of the university, its distinctiveness, its emphasis on tradition, its emphasis on special way of doing things. Now, let me come back to, as we say in Turkish, sadede. Let me come back to the point. The point is, what is happening to the universities with the funding crisis, with the financial crisis in the world these days. Of course, there are many other trends that Durmuş Bey discussed, which I don't want to go into, like competition, globalization, quality assurance processes, impact of the market, role assigned to universities in the age of knowledge, and technology. These are very, very important aspects that from time to time present opportunities to universities, but they also pose very, very important challenges to the traditional way of doing things at the universities that I try to give examples through quotation. Now, one of the most important problems, of course, is the declining nature of state funds. This, during my career as a rector of one of the top universities in Turkey, this is one of the crises that we lived through. But visiting Europe, visiting the United States, attending conferences in those places, I also became aware that there is a very, very important funding crisis. For example, I never forget a meeting that I attended at on the campus of the University of Minnesota, where rectors from Michigan, from Minnesota, from California, all complained about decreasing state funds for universities. Now, another point that I like to make is that state funds are not only declining, but the nature of the state funds that are given to universities is also going through a very important change. That is, there's a move from line item budget systems to lump sum budget systems. Now this is, this creates a very important impact on how we manage universities. Funding crisis creates a very, very important impact on how we manage universities because as a rector I can tell you that during those days we had a line item budgeting system. It's very easy, you don't make any management decisions, it's already made for you. They tell you how much you can spend on buildings, how many professors or how many faculty you can have, how much you can pay them, what kind of equipment you can buy, how much you can spend on your labs and various other, your library and other support facilities. In managerial terms, it's a very easy system. You don't really have to do much because it's all given to you, and you just have to manage your university within those financial guidelines. But with decreasing funds, with decreasing funds, what happens to the universities is they have to go out and get money, find money. And with changing nature of state funds, that is, if they give you a lump sum, you have to make strategic decisions. That is, with the liberalization of how you spend your money, the money that is allocated to you by the state, and a decreasing amount of money, you have to make important managerial decisions. In some cases, this may include how much money you are going to pay your salaries, to your academic personnel. What kind of management decisions you will make on buildings, on investments, on so on and so forth. So what's happening is that the crisis in the funding system is forcing a new type of management on the universities. This is happening all over the world. That is, the pressure on the rectors is to become managers rather than rectors of leaders of a senate, leaders of an academic community. And here, for example, one of the things that I want to differ from what Gülmuş has said, the trend in Europe towards quality processes is a concomitant of this process. That is, if you give somebody the right, or if you give a manager, the rector in this case, or the academic leader, the right to manage the university according to strategic goals, then you are decreasing your input controls. Line item budget system is an input control. Then you're moving towards output controls. You would like to measure the performance of the university. This is why more sophisticated accreditation processes and quality evaluation is becoming a part of the higher education life in Turkey, all over the world. I know academics do not like quality evaluation. During the 90s, at Boğaziçi University, we were chosen as a pilot study for the establishment of quality evaluation. My faculty chased out the British experts from the university, and we faced a very, very important crisis. But still, we have to live with it because the managerial styles, the new switch from academic leadership towards a managerial type of leadership in the universities requires this type of output controls. The universities are increasingly involved in market operations for income generation. That is, you have to, if the state is not giving you enough money, and I face this crisis at my university, then you have to push your university into the market to generate income by offering the services of the university to the society. This may be research, this may be in lifelong education, applied research, especially applied research becomes a very, very important part of the universities. That is, just staying in your cocoon or in your ivory tower and just worrying about pure research is not anymore very productive, or it's not the rule of the game in the universities. It may not be, because you also want to make funds, create funds for the university through what I would say market operations for income generation.
In fact, these days, I mean, people, when you attend academic meetings, experts do not really talk about the distinction between pure and applied research. One of the most interesting comments I heard was about a month ago in Washington, when a very important, well-known researcher said that there's no applied and pure research. Difference between applied and pure research. The difference, there's research and research waiting to be applied. So these are very, very, they are very interesting. These new trends in higher education are having a very important influence on the universities itself. Another area, for example, rectors increasingly find themselves in all over the world is fundraising. This is a philanthropic activity that American university presidents probably know better than any others. I mean, the rector of George Washington University, Steve Trottenberg, used to be a good friend of mine, and one of the things he used to say to me, my job is to go out and find money, nothing else. My provost will run the university. Now, fundraising is a very, very interesting thing, and it creates important dilemmas for universities. Let me explain one experience I had at Boğaziçi University. I mean, our period was known as a fundraising period. We got many donations to the university to do certain things, build dormitories, renovate dormitories, labs, classrooms, old buildings that was very difficult to renovate by historical buildings, very difficult to renovate with state money. So we went out and raised money. One of the offers I got, a very interesting episode in Turkish higher education history, is that at the time, the largest media mogul, I would say, leader, Aydın Doğan, approached us and they said, I don't want to establish my own private university, but I would like to do something quality at a public university. So we said, why don't you establish at Boğaziçi University the Aydın Doğan Communication Institute. And he was ready to donate money on a long-term basis after an initial sum. But what happened was there was a faculty revolt saying that the autonomy of the university and our academic freedom is being threatened. Now you can see this kind of thing happening in other parts of the world where universities go out and try to raise money, give names to buildings and programs where faculties react, saying that this is not in our old tradition, ivory tower tradition, that big money is coming into the university to create I'm sorry, I was carried over. To create, funds for yourself. So new rectors have to be really concerned with, very much concerned with fundraising as well. So that also requires a different ability. That requires, as Steve Trottenberg told me, just another set of qualities that is conducive to raising money in the society. So you're moving towards a managerial type of leadership. Student fees, for example, we are moving more and more towards tuition in the universities. Very unpopular in Turkey, very unpopular in Europe. But still, student fees and students paying tuition is becoming an important trend. But developing policies to acquire more funds from students is a very important political problem. It's also a very important managerial problem, especially, it may not be in the American case, but it is in many European countries that I know, and also in a place like Turkey. Because there is a very important, people automatically assume that free education is equal to social justice, which I don't think is true. If you have very income distribution problems in your country, that is necessarily reflected into higher education. And if you have free education within a setting of income, mal-income distribution, is this social justice or not? It's a question that begs an answer, and it becomes a managerial problem for university rectors. Now, let me try to wrap up in my 5 minutes, 4 minutes perhaps right now. Let me try to wrap up. Now, how do we deal with these crises? Is the managerial type, the managerial rector is an answer to the university, to university management. I think it poses important threats. It poses important threats in the sense that a university as we know it, university as I try to discuss by reference to some of the thinkers on what a university is, faces the danger of becoming a slave of the marketplace. Now, the traditional struggle of the university for autonomy, for academic freedom, has been directed towards the state, protecting the university from state power. This is why our values of academic freedom and values of institutional autonomy have been very instrumental. But nowadays, the problem also, we face a very important problem from the marketplace as well. Is the university becoming a slave of economic power? Now, through the funding crisis, through the transformation of the university to managerialism, from what I would call collegialism on the one hand, collegial way of running the universities through senates, through academic councils, through deliberation, through sort of protecting itself from outside market forces by emphasizing professionalism and being an academic in a university is gone. Those days are gone. But I think there are new threats. The new threats, the managerial threats, I think, we have to face those managerial threats. Now, how do we face them? Now, the guideline for this, I think, I was very much impressed by two books that Burton Clark wrote. One of them is The Entrepreneurial University, and the second one is sort of revisiting his entrepreneurial university. And his argument was that the universities in the first book had no chance but to become entrepreneurial, to become and adopt a managerial style of running the university. Rectors had to be managers. Rectors had to be entrepreneurs. And the forces are forcing the university towards that paradigm. In his second book, Sustaining Change in Universities, he revisits that idea. He sees managerialism as an important threat to university. And then his answer is, of course, I don't have time really to reflect too much on it, but his answer is that universities have to find a happy medium between collegialism and managerialism. He makes a very strong argument. He made a very strong argument in his book, in his earlier book, against how inefficient the universities may be if they are run purely based on academics, academic deliberation, academic councils, and how universities become very conservative institutions if they are run like that. And in sustaining change in universities, his second book, he emphasizes the fact that, well, yes, I was still right on the collegial manner of managing a university, but the pure managerial style also poses very important threats to academic freedom, to institutional autonomy as well. So the challenge for him on sustaining change in the universities in the second book was to build a happy medium between collegialism and managerialism. I think this is still a challenge that the universities run. Do I have an answer? I don't have an answer. As a rector, I'm aware, and as the chair of the Magna Carta Observatory in Italy right now, we always are being faced with this question. Do you have a formula for it? No. Well, universities, in a way, they produce formulas, but they should not be run against formulas. But we should be aware that universities stand for very important values: academic freedom for pre-research and dissemination of that research, and institutional autonomy to decide, to be able to decide, to guide the university. I mean, Durmuş Bey talked about diversification. This is where institutional autonomy comes. In this day and age, you have to have institutional autonomy for the universities to chart their own way, they chart their own different way. So we have to be aware, as managers of universities, as persons who run education systems, higher education systems in the country, that universities are valuable as long as they have academic freedom and institutional autonomy. If they lose that, well, they become simple institutions of higher education where some knowledge is imparted. So managerialism, I think, offers very important opportunities to universities to make their own strategic plans, to chart their own different ways, to experiment with programs, to experiment with, all sorts of experimentation. But it also poses important dangers that universities may become forces of new global forces in the society, especially emanating from the marketplace. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Ergüder. Let me invite you to a coffee break before we go on with the next session for today. So let us have a 10 minutes coffee break and then come back on 10:45 so we can start on time the next session.
Presentation for the
How
next
are you,
session.
sir?
Yes, I'm fine. Yes, Regaman. This is